Biana Losa Ailiant. Born as the legitimate daughter of the Marques's family, she was always the protagonist wherever she went. Even though she had great power, she always underestimated it and had everyone beneath her feet. However, that was just an illusion. A foolish woman. Why did she desperately seek love? Why did she want what wasn't hers? Even having everything, why was she always looking for something more? Her only thought was that if someone didn't love her, she would simply discard that person. And seeing everything as if it were a theater play, that made the protagonist never forget that they were the same person. One morning in the Marquis's house, a small hand stretches over the bed. A familiar, yet at the same time strange feeling. A room exactly as she remembered. Looking at herself in the mirror, she was sure. She recognized this face. Biana Losa Ailiant, and also Leah. That made her question. Was she the reincarnation of Bian after her death? Or was she Leah, trying to find some emotion in her monotonous life? Or maybe she was little Bian who could see a glimpse of the future. It could all be just a dream. But one thing she was sure of. She was Biana Losa Ailiant, who cursed the world as she died. But she was also Leah, who lived a peaceful life until she met her end. And now she was Bian. Little Bian, looking at herself in the mirror. Carrying the memories of two people was something strange and extremely mysterious. And her thoughts were interrupted by a maid who entered the room. She was shocked because the young lady was already awake and standing. Quickly, she apologized and said she would prepare the bath as soon as possible. Before Bian could respond, the maid ran off. Her old personality was probably the reason for that. Because after all, everything had to be perfect. The perfect bath, the perfect temperature, the dress, the accessories, all meticulously arranged. Everything had to be perfect even before the young lady woke up. And if even one small thing wasn't as planned, the young lady would be irritated all day. But that was until yesterday, because today, the story is different. The maid returns carrying the water for the bath, and Bian asks her name. The maid doesn't know how to respond or how to get out of that mess. But looking at her calloused hands and her skin, she was probably a low-ranking servant. And Biana didn't understand why she had been sent to serve her. Finally, the maid answers, saying her name is Mary. Bian then says that since she is the only legitimate daughter of the Marquis, someone like Mary shouldn't be attending to the young lady. In desperation, the maid only apologizes and says it was an order from the head maid. The only luck that maid had was that today, the person in the young lady's body was not the same person who was there yesterday. And because of that, she would survive. Bian asks what exactly the head maid said and where she is. Desperate, the maid starts to cry and says she doesn't know the reason, only that she was sent there. Bian realizes she won't be able to get any more information out of the maid, especially in the state she's in, crying desperately, and just asks her to leave, since she can barely speak. At least go drink some water and stop hiccuping. The maid is touched by the young lady's concern and can't even respond. As Bian realizes the gentle approach didn't work, she decides to speak in a more authoritative way, ordering the maid to call another servant. And with that, of course, the maid runs out of the room to call someone. Two new maids arrive to serve her, and Biana questions why the head maid would have done that, knowing very well her personality. She would never send someone so inexperienced to serve her. Unless something urgent happened and she didn't even notice that Mary wasn't a maid, but just a servant. Bian asks again where the head maid is, and they say she is in the Marchioness's room. And as she heads toward the Marchioness's room, the maids try to stop her, since it wouldn't be good for her to go there now. The old Bian might have taken out all her frustration and anger on those maids. However, the only person who ever showed any interest in Bian was precisely the head maid, who took care of her since she was a child. And being so selfish, she could never bear the idea of her nanny prioritizing the Marchioness instead of her. But today's Bian, as much as she's going on instinct to see what's happening, can't stop thinking that this is all very childish. As she approached the Marchioness's room, she began to hear screams. The maids tried to stop her from entering the room, but even so, she needed to know what was happening to prepare for the future. And so, she decided to open the door herself and enter the room. Upon entering, she was met with the sight of the Marquess and the Marchioness being held back by the head maid. The Marquess simply turned his back and said he was leaving. Meanwhile, the Marchioness began to lose it because he was walking away without even looking back. And looking closely at the Marchioness's behavior, the resemblance between her and the Bian who had died was clear, not just in appearance, but especially in behavior. The Marchioness was the only daughter of a renowned family of merchants, and she married the Marquess at the age of 18. A well-known story in high society, where everyone knew how she pursued the Marquess for years until she finally captivated him. She spared neither money nor people to gain his love. However, the Marquess was an extremely cold man, and he wasn't just indifferent. He actively avoided any contact with her. No one understood why he had married her, but many speculated that she had won him over with the enormous dowry she paid. As the years passed, her obsession with the Marquess only worsened, and in her desperation to earn his love, she even became pregnant. However, what was born was a girl, and thus she couldn't be the heir. That was why the Marchioness hated her daughter so much. Because in her mind, if it had been a boy, he would be the heir and the Marquess would finally look at her. But Bion knew nothing would have changed. The Marquess had absolutely no interest in them. Even if she tried to explain this, the Marchioness would never understand. In a full-blown frenzy, the Marchioness lunged at Bion, trying to kill her. The head maid did her best to hold her back so nothing would happen. However, once free, Bion realized that her mother truly was trying to hurt her. Especially in this child's body, it would be harder to defend herself. So the best option was to run. And that's what she did. Once she got out, she asked the guard to wedge his sword through the door to keep it securely shut so her mother couldn't open it. In a fit of madness, the Marchioness began to scratch at the door with her fingernails. Bion thought that no matter how much she searched through all the memories she had never seen the Marchioness reach that level. It was probably because the Marquess had visited her today. Biana thought she had never in her life seen the Marquess in the Marchioness's room. He usually posted guards in front of his office and bedrooms specifically to keep her out. And that raised a question. How exactly was Bion born? She clearly resembled the Marchioness in appearance. However, no one from the maternal or paternal family had golden hair. Was she really the Marquess's daughter? As strange as it was, since the Marchioness was so obsessed with the Marquess, it seemed unlikely she would have an affair with another man. But her appearance truly raised doubts. So, Bion decided to ask the Marquess directly. Whether or not she was his legitimate daughter didn't matter much. After all, she had already lived once and failed. So there was no reason to be afraid. The guard stopped her at the door and asked what exactly she was doing there. Bion said she came to see her father, but before the guard could stop her, she simply opened the door. The butler was stunned by the sudden intrusion and asked what the young lady was doing there. Meanwhile, the Marquess only looked at her with indifference, and Bion didn't understand how the Marchioness could have fallen in love with someone like him. She approached the desk and asked the Marquess if she was really his biological daughter. Surprised, he stopped writing and asked what she meant by that. Bion simply said it was exactly what she asked. And he replied, asking if that answer really mattered, and that she should take her games somewhere else. She then said that maybe it wasn't something important to her now, but if she intended to reach the top in the future, it could become a problem she didn't want to face. The Marquess asked if she intended to become Empress. Of course, our protagonist is bold and responded with another question. Just by wanting to be an Empress, can someone become one? Even so, the Marquess insisted on not answering the question, and she said again that questions about bloodline can sometimes become a fatal weakness. The reason she was trying to settle this once and for all was because, in her past life, it was something she heard frequently. She really did become the Empress, but her bloodline was constantly questioned. And to make things worse, the Marquess never addressed this matter in her past life, which only fueled the public scandal and made it harder for her to gain the power she desired. Bion tried one more time, stating that she wasn't stupid enough to walk straight into the fire while carrying her weakness. And that's why, once and for all, she needed to know if she was the legitimate daughter of House Iliant. But again, the Marquess replied that this question wasn't worth answering. Finally, the protagonist understood that, in truth, the Marquess wasn't being silent. He simply didn't answer because he had never doubted that she truly was his daughter. As he had always been a man of few words and fewer expressions, she and everyone else completely misinterpreted his silence. And in truth, all this time, the only thing tormenting her in the past were her own insecurities. And so, she finally received her confirmation that she really was his daughter. The Marquess was surprised to see Bonnie smiling, but at the same time, he looked slightly angry. At least now we know he has some kind of expression. Answering the question the Marquess had asked earlier, Bonnie continued the conversation, saying that he asked if she wanted to become Empress, and in truth, among all the unmarried women in the Empire, how many don't dream of becoming the Empress? In her other life, she had also wanted to stand beside His Majesty as the Empress and believed that only if she became someone worthy to stand beside him, then they could live happily ever after, like in a fairy tale. But now that she knows what future awaits her, only unhappiness and no love, does she still covet that position? Should she follow that predetermined life like a script? Or maybe search for what she truly wants to do now? In the past, she deeply desired the position of Empress. However, that role isn't something you just want and achieve, because there are many people and interests involved. In other words, it's a position that, if it's meant to happen, she might not be able to avoid. The Marquess asked again if that was truly what she wanted, and once more she responded with another question. Does her desire even matter? But before they could continue their conversation, which had become more of a game of unanswered questions, someone abruptly entered the room. It was the butler, who looked completely shocked, and he could only say the words, "The Marchioness," which made the Marquess rise to his feet, suddenly tense. At that moment, Bonnie remembered her past. Her memories of that exact day were fresh. When she woke up, the head maid wasn't present. She argued with the maids because she was in a bad mood. She took it out on all the furniture and household items, but no one seemed to go stop her. Only after she had vented all her anger did the butler appear in her quarters with that same expression on his face. She didn't know why she had forgotten it, but it was that day the Marchioness passed away. The next morning, it was very sunny. Such a beautiful day, sadly, for a funeral. As was customary, the Marchioness's body would be cremated and placed in the Alient family mausoleum. The cremation would occur after a private viewing attended only by family, but the body would only be seen at the moment of cremation. Everyone questioned what had really happened. How had the Marchioness died? And since the Marquess had said nothing, perhaps it hadn't been an illness. The only thing people seemed interested in was seeing how they would present the Marchioness's body. Would she still look beautiful, even in death? Which was entirely vulgar and inappropriate for such a setting. However, before the coffin was even opened, the Marquess stepped forward and placed a flower on top. Everyone saw this as a sign of great disrespect. After all, he didn't even look at her one last time and just placed the flower on the closed coffin. Perhaps he truly was a heartless man. And that was always how the protagonist had viewed the Marquess. But for the first time, she was able to understand him and stop misjudging him. In her past life, when she didn't understand much and believed it was just his indifference, with all those rumors being heard by them, she had gotten very upset during the funeral and stormed out. And of course, he hadn't stopped her. Even now, she believed he wouldn't stop her either. But this time, she understood his silence. The truth was that the Marchioness had taken her own life. While the maids weren't watching, she threw herself from the 3rd floor of the mansion. And since mansions were quite different from those in the modern world, that was a significant height. Funerals where the bodies were not shown were only done in cases of contagious diseases, or when the body was so disfigured it couldn't be viewed. But even in those cases, an explanation had to be given, because suicide was a taboo in that empire. Those who took their own lives were not given farewells or blessings for their next life. As the Marquess, he ordered silence. The cause of death never became public. Even in her previous life, the protagonist never knew how her mother truly died. And so, just like in her past life, it would forever be recorded that the Marchioness died a natural death. And that was a gesture of kindness from the Marquess, even if it appeared as indifference to others. Out of respect, he kept the coffin closed, placing the flower on top. Beyond did the same and placed her flower next to the Marquess's. Before she could step away from the coffin, a man who had also come to pay his respects stood behind her. This was Count Pison, the Marchioness's father and also Biane's grandfather. Trembling, he also placed a flower on the coffin. The protagonist understood that at that moment, he was one of the people feeling the loss of his own daughter the most. As the Count stood up, he lost his balance and nearly fell, but his bodyguard helped him remain standing. Before they could leave, the bodyguard simply stared at Biane, and she didn't quite understand why, nor did she remember him from her past life. She thought that since he was staring so intensely, he would say something, but he just turned and kept walking. That left her a bit embarrassed, because it felt like something that only happened inside her head. Still, that feeling of familiarity lingered. The Marchioness's funeral lasted about 3 days, and on the final day, the body was sent to the crematorium to finally turn to ashes. Biane remembered that when she was younger, in her previous life, and even before she reincarnated in this one, There were moments when she truly desired her mother's love. She tried to change her behavior, be cuter, even act like a boy. But her mother never showed any interest in her daughter. The only person the Marchioness had eyes for was the Marquis. The protagonist even wondered if maybe she resembled the Marquis in some way. Perhaps then her mother would have looked at her more. None of that matters now. She will never get those answers. And with the Marchioness out of the picture, the Marquis will have to find a new wife. Because after all, he only has a daughter, and a woman cannot inherit the title of Marquis. But thinking back to her past life, up until the day she regressed, she didn't remember the Marquis ever taking a new wife. Maybe that meant he didn't hate the Marchioness as much as it seemed. Or at least, she hoped so. Maybe her mother would find peace in her next life, if the man she truly loved didn't hate her. The Marquis handed the Marchioness's ashes to Bonnie, cut a lock of his hair, cut a lock of hers as part of the final ritual. All people directly tied by blood were supposed to place a piece of their hair into the urn with the ashes, symbolizing a connection even after death. Normally, Count Pison's hair should have also been included. However, because he had been in shock on the first day, that hadn't happened. A woman was waiting outside the crematorium, saying at least she wasn't that late. It was the Countess of Pison, Bonnie's grandmother, although she had never truly considered her as such. Since she had run away on the first day of the funeral in her past life, she had never even met her grandmother before. There had been no need for them to meet, because in truth, they had no blood relation. The Countess of Pison had once been a commoner before marrying the Count, so there was no blood connection between them. The Countess came precisely to deliver a lock of her husband's hair, the Marchioness's father, because he would have been very upset to know he hadn't been part of the final rite. The Marquis accepted it, placed the hair into the urn along with the ashes, and sealed it. The Marquis, holding the ashes, simply left. When Bonnie went to follow him, the Countess called out to her, asking if she wouldn't like to see the Count. After all, he would love to see her. Bonnie didn't really believe that. How could he want to see her if even when she was born, he barely spent time in the capital? And after the Marchioness went mad, he never visited their mansion again. She then decided to ask why the Count would want to see her. And the Countess replied that it was because she was his only blood relative. In her past life, Bonnie remembered that shortly after the Marchioness passed away, the Count was so shaken that he too passed away a few days later. A small part of his fortune was inherited by her, but the majority was left to the Countess. Since she was of humble origin, everyone suspected that perhaps she had killed the Count for money. Even Bonnie's nanny constantly told her to accuse the Countess in court. Because of Bonnie's testimony, the Countess faced several accusations, and while being interrogated by the tribunal, she suffered a miscarriage, as she had been pregnant when the Count died. Returning to the conversation with the Countess, Bonnie said she wasn't the Count's only blood relative. Naturally, the Countess denied it and insisted that she was. So Bonnie asked what then was the child the Countess was carrying in her belly? Was it not of Pison blood? Thinking back, Bonnie remembered that the Count died 2 months after this date, so the Countess might not even be aware of her own pregnancy. She told the Countess to calm down, because being stressed would do no good for the baby. She didn't have to believe Bonnie's words. But if she doesn't want to lose that child, she'd better take good care of her health. And maybe it would be a good idea to tell the Count as soon as possible. That didn't help much though, because the Countess became even more irritated and said that he's not a Count. He's her grandfather. The protagonist kept walking and said she could call him whatever she wanted. And if she wanted to call him Count, she would. The Countess remained upset and questioned why they always treated him that way. Bonnie then asked, "Who are they? The Marchioness and her?" Because to her, family is nothing more than a bunch of strangers. In her old life, she truly loved her parents. They were practically her whole world. But after living as Leah, she experienced true parental love for the first time. And that made her realize one thing. Just sharing blood doesn't make you family. Bonnie decided to leave. She had already taken up too much of the Countess's time. The Countess kept shouting, asking why Bonnie didn't see him as her family. But Bonnie walked away anyway. Back at the mansion, the head maid was in tears, feeling sorry for Bonnie, wondering how she could have left such a defenseless child, now motherless, all alone. Bonnie didn't understand the commotion because even when her mother was alive, they barely interacted. She stayed silent while the other maids begged the nanny to stop crying, saying she might collapse at this rate. And who would take care of the young lady if not her? Even with all the maids talking, Bonnie eventually fell asleep. However, she began to hear voices growing louder. It seemed like someone was trying to enter her room. It was the Countess. trying to speak to Bonnie again. Before things could escalate between her and the nanny, Bonnie decided to intervene and ask exactly what was going on. She said she had been trying to rest, but since the Countess had come all the way there, she might as well come in already. The nanny tried everything to stop it, but Bonnie acted firmly, which even left the nanny unsettled. Bonnie then asked the other maids to take the nanny to another room and invited the Countess to sit down and have some tea. The Countess commented on how different the young lady seemed compared to the rumors she had heard. With a frustrated attempt to dodge the main subject, Bonnie began to get irritated and told her to get to the point. Again, the Countess asked Bonnie to visit her grandfather just once. And since she began threatening to say the young lady was mistreating her servants, Bonnie decided to go visit her grandfather. Upon arriving at the Count's mansion, the Countess explained that he wasn't doing well. After the funeral, he had fainted, and the first thing he asked when he regained consciousness was about Bonnie. When she opened the door to his chambers, he was overjoyed to see his granddaughter and asked her to come closer. Seeing him up close, she realized that the Countess would never have killed the Count. She wouldn't have needed to, given the state he was in. Holding Bonnie's hand, the Count asked if she was all right. Bonnie didn't really know what to say, because after all, she and the Marchioness had never been close. She couldn't even say they were strangers. In her past life, at least, she had remorse for her mother. But in this one, she only felt pity for the life her mother had lived, especially because she had done something very similar in her past life, throwing everything away for love. Thinking about it now, she didn't even understand why she had acted that way back then. Was love really that important? That they both lost themselves and acted like fools? And now, would she be able to avoid making the same mistake from her past life? Or when she saw him again, would she end up making all the same choices? While Bonnie was lost in thought, her grandfather hugged her, apologizing. As painful as it was, he should never have turned his back. It was all his fault. And he asked Bonnie not to cry. She wondered why he was saying that, since the one crying was him, not her. At least, that's what she thought, until he wiped her eyes. And at that moment, she realized she was crying. After spending some time together, they said their goodbyes, and the Count assured her that he wasn't leaving because he was abandoning her, but for her own good that he would only be away for a while. A few days after that meeting, Bianna's routine returned to normal. Her nanny was full of excitement, trying to choose something for her to wear, while Bianna herself wasn't the least bit excited about entering the palace. Her nanny told her to focus because entering the palace required more caution than she imagined. Most girls didn't set foot in the palace until their coming-of-age celebration. However, since Miss Bianna had received an invitation even before her birthday, that proved just how special she was. The nanny didn't like any of the dresses. In fact, she had even wanted to commission a new one just for the event. However, since it was all so last minute, she decided to go with a blue lace dress, because that was surely the color that suited the young lady best. That blue brought Bianna memory from the past of a girl with blue hair, someone she clearly didn't want to remember because she told her nanny that she wasn't going to wear it. She hated that color. Blue, like the sky, was once Bianna's favorite color, but now she despised it. Even recalling the person tied to that color was enough to shake her. She thought that maybe the recent meeting with her grandfather had made her a little more vulnerable, and now she couldn't keep her emotions under control. And on top of that, the fact that she was going to the palace to meet the crown prince had her extremely nervous. The anxiety of falling in love with him again, so deeply and foolishly like the first time. Would he still be undeniably handsome? The nanny, noticing her expressions, asked if the young lady was all right. But Bianna quickly pulled herself together and said nothing had happened, and they went back to looking at dresses. She helped Bianna into a green dress, did her hair and face, and told her she truly was the most beautiful girl in the empire. And that didn't sound good to Bianna, because in her previous life, she really did believe she was the most beautiful in the empire. Not that she thought she was ugly, but she certainly wasn't the fairest. That title belonged to someone else. The girl with the light blue hair. The girl the crown prince had fallen in love with. The official reason for the invitation to the palace was a gesture from the emperor to offer condolences to the marquis's daughter who had lost her mother. But she knew the real reason. The emperor had only one empress, 2 imperial consorts, and many concubines as wives. He had fathered over 10 children, among them 6 princes, but only 2 had the potential to inherit the throne. The first was the eldest prince, son of the first consort. The second was the 6th prince, born of the last empress, who had died over 10 years ago. The emperor had declared the sixth prince as crown prince at birth. But tragically, that same year, his mother passed away. The new empress was the daughter of a powerless baron and failed to increase her influence within the empire. As a result, the noble faction began to support the first prince, born of the first consort, as the next heir. The first prince was 16 years older than the crown prince, which was a huge disadvantage. But the emperor remained firm in his decision to back the sixth prince. And the first step in the emperor's plan to strengthen the sixth prince was none other than Biana. The House of Iliant, which had remained neutral for generations, was highly coveted by both the emperor and the nobles. But no matter what they did, they could never win over the Marquess. So, the emperor decided on a new approach, through the Marquess's daughter, Bian. The protagonist knew very well that her trip to the palace wasn't just for condolences. The emperor needed an excuse to bring her there, and the Marchioness's death provided the perfect justification. He even sent the royal carriage to pick her up. A carriage reserved only for royalty or those officially recognized by the emperor. That alone made his intentions clear to everyone. Once again, Bian was walking down the path of fate, afraid of her own feelings when seeing the crown prince again. Even though she was now someone new, someone with more experience from her past lives, she had to keep her heart strong to overcome the reckless love that Bian once had for the crown prince, and stay sane to carry out her plan. Inside the carriage, on the way to the palace, the Marquess, for the first time, unlike in the past, spoke to Bian, asking if she really wanted to become empress like all the others. As always, those two could only speak in sharp words. Bian merely asked if her opinion even mattered in this case. And the Marquess, with his own bite, replied that if it didn't, he wouldn't be asking. Even so, the protagonist questioned why he was worried about her now. He had never done that before. He simply said that he was concerned because this was about her. Bian remembered that in her past life, her father never cared about her. Not even when she became the crown princess, or even the empress. He never once asked if that was what she wanted. But since he was acting differently now, maybe it was time for her to change too. She asked what would happen if she didn't want to be empress. If her will was not to be the empress, would she really be allowed to follow it? In the emperor's mind, that was already clear. Bian would be the crown princess. Unless she had some major disqualification, which wasn't going to happen, she would inevitably become the crown princess. The crown prince never chose her out of love, but because of the power behind her. Even the emperor had no other option but Bian. She was the perfect candidate to be the next crown princess and future empress. She decided to question her father again. If she had no interest in becoming empress, would all of this simply disappear and never happen? Finally, the Marquess said that would be very difficult. That irritated her a little, because if he knew it would be difficult, why even bother asking in the first place? At that moment, they arrived at the imperial palace. The Marquess stepped out first to help her down, and as he offered his hand, he said that although it would be difficult, it wasn't impossible. Look at that. It seemed the ice-cold heart was melting, and he was starting to worry about his daughter. Bian accepted his hand to step down and wondered, what did the Marquess mean by that? Not impossible? Did it mean he would help her? Or was it something else she didn't understand? She truly had no idea what the Marquess was thinking. Upon arriving at the palace, the two were announced before the emperor, who asked them to enter the chamber. Bian was still nervous to be back in this place, a place she knew very well, both the audience hall and the palace itself. And soon she would likely see him for the first time in this life. Both Bian and Marquess Gabriel introduced themselves to the emperor. The emperor greeted them with the widest smile, saying it was incredible how Bian looked just like her father. But she didn't remember him saying that in her past life. He always laughed, yes, but back then she hardly knew how to introduce herself. The emperor praised her again and asked her to come closer. She looked to the Marquess for approval, and he nodded. As she stepped forward, the emperor asked her age, and Bian replied that she would be turning 11 this year. The emperor said that was perfect, and she knew exactly what he meant by that. But for some reason, she felt that this time he seemed to like her more than he did in the past. That good energy didn't last long, though. The guards announced the arrival of the crown prince. Bian was afraid to look at him, afraid of feeling all those emotions again and destroying herself over this foolish love. Or maybe this time, his presence wouldn't mean anything at all. The prince seemed very pleased to see them and offered his condolences to the emperor. His appearance was much younger than she remembered, but that made sense. He was only 14 now. And in her memories, he had been much older. Still, both then and now, he truly had a beautiful face. Gracefully, Bion introduced herself to the crown prince, and he was impressed by her manners. The emperor asked him to come closer as well and remarked that they truly looked like a perfect match. He asked if the Marquess didn't think the same, but the Marquess didn't reply. So the emperor turned to his advisor, who said the two looked wonderful together, that they even resembled a pair of wings on a bird. It was the first time the protagonist had seen this side of the emperor. She didn't know if he had always been this way, or if she had just been too preoccupied, paying attention only to the crown prince. The advisor reminded him it was time to attend the court session. The emperor kept complimenting Bion, saying he had probably lost track of time talking to such a delightful young lady, and that it would be a shame to let her leave so quickly. He suggested she stay in the garden for a while since it was in full bloom. The protagonist quickly realized this had all been planned. They had everything arranged even before she arrived. The emperor advised Biona to wait in the garden while her father went to the court session. Even though she didn't want to go, she couldn't disobey the emperor. He also asked the crown prince to help her find her way around the palace and escort her to the garden. The crown prince agreed and offered his hand to Bion. As he extended his hand, hers was clearly trembling, because this part was exactly the same as in her past life. But the only difference was, in her past life, the tremble came from nervousness about spending time with him. Today, it was a tremble of fear of the person she might become. They walked together and arrived at the garden of Iapeside Palace, the crown princess's palace, which now stood empty. The protagonist couldn't help but notice how identical everything felt to her previous life. Even the sky seemed to shine the same way, and the breeze blew exactly as it had that day. It was as if the gods were making a joke of her situation, because at that exact moment, a stronger gust of wind blew, sending white petals fluttering around the crown prince, turning his silver hair into a perfect match for the scene. And at that moment, just like in her past life, he reached his hand toward Bion's face to pick a petal that had landed in her hair. And it was exactly like that, in her past life, that she fell in love with Sirius Pristin, the crown prince of the Pristin Empire, and the one who would become the future emperor. Even if she died over and over again, she knew that she would still remember him, precisely because she had loved him enough to throw her life away. Thinking back, she remembered that at first, he didn't hate her. He wasn't one to show much affection, but he wasn't indifferent either, like the Marquess. Since he had lived as the crown prince his whole life, he knew very well how to treat people. He always treated her with courtesy, and she ended up mistaking that courtesy for love. In her previous life, she never received genuine affection from him. And many times, because she didn't know the difference between courtesy and love, she misunderstood the crown prince's true intentions. It was only when he fell in love with someone else that she realized the clear difference. The way he treated his beloved was completely different from how he treated everyone else. And maybe if in that moment she had accepted it and let him go, maybe things would have turned out differently. But at the time, she refused to accept that situation and placed all her resentment on the woman he loved. Even though he didn't love her, he always treated her with respect for being his wife. But at some point, he began to hate and despise her. And the only thing she could think was that he had changed because of that other woman. And all of that was because she had refused, back then, to admit the truth. He had always looked at her with an air of contempt, even before he fell for the woman with blue hair. The day after her visit to the palace, her nanny came in all cheerful, saying that the young lady had received flowers from the imperial palace. And with that, the nanny concluded that the crown prince must really have developed feelings for the young lady. But Bion knew the truth, and that simple gift wasn't so simple. After all, Lisha flowers symbolized the crown princess, so it wasn't even likely that the crown prince had sent them. He probably didn't even know she had received those flowers. It wasn't really a gift. It was more of a message from the emperor to the nobles that the next crown princess had already been chosen, especially because the Ailiant family wasn't aligned with any political faction, and Biona was the heiress of both the Marquess and the Count, her grandfather. And since a woman couldn't inherit a noble house, her husband would most likely take on the title of Marquess. In her past life, she remembered that around this time, the new heir to the House of Ailiant had already been chosen. But she couldn't recall who it was, since the only thing she could think about was the crown prince. She even felt relieved that in their meeting in this life, she had handled things better than she expected. Even when Biona's heart raced at the sight of the crown prince, the memories she had from her life as Leah kept her grounded. And thanks to that, she didn't fall hopelessly in love with him like she did in her past life. Annoyed by the fact she was thinking about the prince again, Beyond decided to do something else. She decided to take a walk to see if she could distract herself a bit. As she left her chambers, she noticed that the mansion's garden was completely neglected, probably because the Marchioness only had eyes for the Marquess and didn't take care of anything in the house, letting the garden turn into a jungle. Even in chaos, that place still emanated peace. Beyond walked through the garden, slightly worried, because since it wasn't well kept, there might be some wild animal. She hoped not, because she wanted to turn that place into a retreat where she could find peace. But even before finishing her thought, she heard a noise coming from a nearby bush. And of course, the first thing that crossed her mind was that it could even be a bear. But thinking rationally, since they were inside a mansion and this was the capital, it probably wasn't anything too big. It was probably a cat or a raccoon, maybe even a small rabbit. Even though she was scared, she decided to face it and see what it was. As she parted the bush, she came across a black-haired creature that almost looked like a cat. And when she pulled that creature from the bush, it turned out to be a child. But the first thing she remembered upon seeing him was her old dog from her life as Leah, Torun. She questioned how that child had ended up there, and who he was. She examined every inch of him, but before she could say anything, they heard the servants calling for him. Worried that if he got too lost in the mansion and ended up in the young lady's quarters, it would be a disaster. Beyond stood up and faced the maids, asking what exactly they meant by that. Seeing the maids hesitate to answer, the protagonist made it clear she wasn't here to play around. She said that now that the Marchioness had passed away, she was the new young lady of the house. So this garden also belonged to her. And since the maids had entered her garden without permission, how dare they not even respond to her question? Desperate, the maids apologized, and Beyond, afraid they would notice the child nearby, covered him with her cloak and told the maids to leave immediately, since they were making too much noise there. After they left, Beyond turned to the child and asked what she should do with him. She remembered exactly who he was in her past life. Shortly after the Marchioness died, the Marquess brought Lant into the mansion. However, in her past life, she only found out about Lant long after he had already arrived. And in that previous life, she hated Lant, because his presence in the mansion shattered her pride by proving she wasn't the only child of the Marquess. Especially because Lant looked far more like the Marquess than she did. Anyone could tell they were father and son just by looking. In her mind back then, while she and the Marchioness were neglected, the Marquess simply brought an outsider child into their home. From the day she found out about him until the day she left for the palace, she tormented Lant every single day and ordered the maids to do the same. And since no one stopped her, and many even encouraged her behavior, she tormented him more and more. And Lant endured all the cruelty in silence. Even when it was the servants bullying him, he never spoke back. He just stared at them. And that made her remember the Marquess even more, because of his silence. And that made her angrier each time, because all the hatred she had for the Marquess, she took out on Lant. And since not even the Marquess seemed to care about the cruelty she inflicted, Lant's only option was to suffer quietly. Strangely, in her past life, even though Lant was the only heir to House Illiant, the Marquess never spoke about succession. The House of Illiant had always struggled with low birth rates. She had heard the Marquess once had a younger brother, but he died very young. Still, she never understood why. If Lant really was the Marquess's son, he didn't do anything to stop the hatred and torment she inflicted. Instead, the only thing the Marquess did was send Lant to the Annex building and make sure he only received the minimum noble education. But now the story was different. In this life, she had never tormented Lant, and didn't intend to, especially now that she realized how much he resembled her old puppy, Torun, and that made her want to take care of him, just like she used to care for her little dog. Beyond tried to talk to him, saying that if she were her past self, he probably wouldn't get away so easily, because he wasn't supposed to run into her at all. But just like her father, he made no sound in response. She decided to tend to his wounds, but since her nanny was in her room, she couldn't take him there. Reaching out her hand to help him up, she remembered a place where she could treat his injuries, and Lant was clearly surprised by her kindness. In her past life, Lant was 4 years younger than her, but because she only saw him much later back then, he had already grown taller than the Marquess. It was amazing to see this little puppy who would become that strong and tall man. As they walked through the overgrown garden unnoticed, the maids were still searching for Lant frantically. Bione noticed how hard he was trying to avoid them. He seemed a little afraid. Then she heard one of the maids losing her patience, saying that if she caught him, he'd be in big trouble. The protagonist realized that Lant had probably already been mistreated by the maids even before she started tormenting him in her past life. But it didn't make sense. If he looked so much like the Marquess, why were the maids treating him like that? He didn't seem like a troublemaker. He just stood there quietly, trembling. Something was very wrong in that mansion, and Bion decided she would get to the bottom of it. Since the Marquess rarely involved himself in household affairs, the butler and the head maid had ended up ruling everything, especially since all the house servants were under her nanny's supervision. After crossing the entire mansion, Bion knocked on a door. Now, you might be wondering, where exactly was she taking this child to treat him without anyone finding out? Where did she go? To the Marquess's office. Yes, seriously, she took him there. Everyone was stunned. The butler didn't know why they had come, and neither did the Marquess. And Bion simply sat down and asked the butler to bring bandages immediately. Bion noticed that the Marquess had been paying closer attention to her since their last conversation, and that was something quite different from how things were in her past life. The butler arrived with the bandages and said that all the wounds on the boy's hands looked more like scratches from something sharp, and that his cheeks were clearly red and swollen. Someone had probably hit him. The protagonist realized it might have happened when she pulled him out of the bushes. And to avoid any problems, she decided to tell the truth about his cheeks. She explained that she had pulled him by the cheeks when she found him in the bushes and had accidentally left those marks. His skin was probably very sensitive, and someone should be more careful so that it wouldn't happen again. She then asked that, as soon as the butler finished tending to the wounds, he should bring a cake to her room. And before leaving, she instructed that the boy should go to her room together with the cake. Later, in her quarters, Lant was moved by all the delicious food. She told him to go ahead and eat. Without hesitation, he reached out with his hands and grabbed the cake, starting to eat. At that moment, he heard the maids commenting about him. How vulgar. He really can't hide his origins. Why is the young lady even eating with someone like that? Bion realized that it would have been fine if she were the one tormenting him, but she didn't appreciate the maids doing it. So she asked them to leave. Caught off guard by the young lady's reaction, the maids asked what had happened. That's when Biona decided to show her claws again, asking if the maids were now in the habit of questioning their masters, and that if words weren't enough, perhaps she should demonstrate with actions. Of course, they left immediately. And Biona noticed that poor Lant was trembling at the slightest sound. He had probably been terribly mistreated. Even though in this life she had decided not to form bonds with anyone, she realized it would be hard to ignore him. And maybe having an ally in this life wasn't such a bad thing. She asked him if he would like her to punish those servants. Although he hesitated for a moment, he shook his head no. Bion asked why not, especially since they had laughed at him. If they did something wrong, they should be punished. Being cruel to him was a serious offense. Poor Lant began to cry, saying it hurt. Punishments hurt too much. Without even thinking, Bion felt compassion and ended up hugging the poor boy. She told him not to worry, that she wouldn't do anything. And from that moment on, she decided to clean up that mansion and put everything in order. Treating him like a little puppy, she kept hugging him and told him to cry as much as he wanted. She was practically treating him as her first possession in this new life. Later, in the Marquess's chambers, she had already decided that in this life she wouldn't let Lant become a cold, emotionless block like his father. So she asked for an instructor. The butler interrupted, saying the young lady already had instructors in various areas: etiquette, culture, math, and history. But she said she needed the best instructors for each subject, because she wanted to educate someone. The Marquess asked who it was. She said it was Lant. He even asked why she was doing this, but her answer was vague. She simply said she wanted to educate him. And since she wouldn't be attending any of her own lessons, he could also dismiss all her teachers. With a clean face and a smile, she said she was certain the Marquess would fulfill her request. Before she left the room, the Marquess asked why she was showing interest in that child. And the protagonist, a little insane as always, simply replied, because Lant belongs to her, and she wouldn't tolerate anyone belittling her little puppy. She said she intended to make him the best in every aspect, and that's why she needed the Marquess's help. In this life, he was still small and adorable, but she was sure that one day, that little puppy would grow into a powerful beast that no one could underestimate. And thus, The Alient family would become the wings that launched that beast forward. As she left the Marquess's chambers, Bion ran into a maid who was clearly nervous. The maid asked if the young lady would be returning to her quarters, and Bion noticed that the maids were observing her more than usual. That one had probably been eavesdropping at the door. A few days later, Lance's room was moved from the annex to the main building by the order of the young lady, but her nanny made sure it was still very far from Bion's room. Now that they were much closer to each other, Bion decided to let her nanny's small interference slide. But that night, she couldn't sleep, worried about whether Lance had already fallen asleep and how he was feeling about the room change. As she got up, she realized that her nanny was not in her room either, and fearing the worst, she ran straight to Lance's room to check if he was all right. What she found was a horrible scene. Several maids were in Lance's room belittling him, calling him a disgusting creature and asking if he even realized whose life he had stolen to crawl his way into that mansion. That a bastard like him should at least know that much. And the person standing in front saying all those things was none other than the nanny. She was asking Lance why he had come to this place, making the young lady suffer because of his presence. Unable to listen to any more nonsense, Bion kicked the door open, causing everyone to hear and flinch in shock. The nanny, confused, asked what the young lady was doing there. But Bion was furious and said she had made a huge mistake, screaming for the butler to come immediately. As soon as he arrived, Bion declared that she had just witnessed Lance being abused by all those maids and the nanny. But in the nanny's mind, the reason the Marchioness had died was precisely because of Lance's presence. And that was why he should suffer for the rest of his life. Bion simply said that the nanny should have been more careful because she wasn't the only one angry. So was the Marquess. After that night, the mansion fell into chaos. With the testimonies of all the maids involved, it became clear that the one behind everything was the head maid. Still, Bion couldn't bear to see her punished. Obviously, what the nanny had done was unforgivable, but she had also been the one who raised and educated Bion. She personally asked the Marquess to dismiss the nanny, and even though he was concerned, he chose to respect his daughter's wishes. The only thing the nanny said before leaving was that Bion would regret this day. She never looked back once as she walked away. After that, Bion made sure to hire all new maids with loyalty, and she never heard any news of the nanny again after that fateful day. One afternoon, while having tea with Lance, she noticed he seemed a little uneasy. Lance decided to ask if she was suffering because he was living in the mansion. She told him not to worry, but even so, he insisted that on that day, all those maids had told him that when he came to the mansion, he made the young lady suffer. Bion knew how to encourage him, and said that she had never felt that way. That she would do everything she could so he never lost his confidence while living there, and that the only thing he needed to remember were her words and how good it was to live in that place. Even with some changes in Bion's life, some events seemed to remain the same in this life. In her past life, she and the Crown Prince became engaged during his coming-of-age celebration. Because she was still very young, the faction supporting the first prince opposed the marriage, so they had only gotten engaged and not married. And if things kept moving the same way they had in her previous life, she was certain that on her 16th birthday, she would become the Crown Princess. 4 years after the Marchioness's death, Bion's 16th birthday was approaching, and concern about the marriage was growing. She needed to do something before everything continued down the same path. And there he was, the cause of all her worry. She was having tea with the Crown Prince while thinking about all of this. He, pretending to be courteous, simply asked if she was all right, because she looked like she had a strange expression. Bion always had to take a deep breath, remind herself of everything she had lived through in her past life, and remember that this wasn't love. It was just courtesy. Since she didn't respond, he started to lose his patience and said he'd call a doctor since she couldn't even answer him. But before he could go, she grabbed him and said she was fine, that there was no need to call any doctor, she was just feeling a little dizzy. He asked again if she was really okay, and she said yes, that he didn't need to worry. Even though they had met several times in this life, being around him still felt uncomfortable to Bion. Things only got worse because the Emperor believed that if Bion and the Crown Prince spent time together at least 2 or 3 times a week, their relationship would naturally develop. But it was quite obvious that the issue wasn't her. It was clearly the Crown Prince, who didn't seem interested in moving the relationship forward at all. Things felt a little different from her past life. She had always thought he found her annoying. But now, in this life, he at least seemed to care about her well-being. Maybe that was because she wasn't as clingy with him as she had been before. But who cares? Her plan was not to marry him in this life. She then decided to bring up the topic of breaking the engagement. She began by saying it had already been 2.5 years since they got engaged. Before she could even finish her sentence, the prince was caught off guard, but realized where she was going with it and asked if he had done something wrong. Bion says no, that the prince has always treated her with the utmost respect, as his fiancée. Even so, he keeps asking if he did something wrong for her to bring up this topic, and she insists that everything has always been perfect. He then asks if spending time with him is uncomfortable for her. At that moment, he's looking at her in the way she remembers from her past life. But she gathers her courage and replies with a question. If I say yes, can we avoid these meetings? He simply laughs, and she also knows this would be difficult for him too. But he replies that since he is her fiancé, they should meet. Finally, the real focus of the conversation arrives, when Bione says that any engagement can be broken. This makes him begin to lose his patience and ask if she truly wants to end their engagement. And Bione says yes, that she would like to end it since she doesn't love him. He simply bursts into laughter at her response and says he didn't know she was such an incredible person, that she has an impressive talent for catching people off guard. But upon realizing Bione is not joking, the prince continues, saying he doesn't know if she's just innocent or pretending to be, because it's extremely rare for royalty or nobility to marry purely for love. Marriage isn't just a union between two people, but an alliance between families meant to strengthen mutual interests. Since she was born into a noble family and enjoyed many privileges, living a life filled with benefits and happiness, she surely understands that marrying for the family's interest is the right thing to do. Even while hearing the prince say all this, Bion can only think that if following the family's interests leads her to tragedy, should she really go down that path? Life is too short, and she doesn't want to waste it going somewhere she doesn't want to be. She then decides to reply to the prince, saying that her dream is to meet someone she truly loves and spend the rest of her life with that person. Happily, a kind of happiness her life as Leah knew, but Bion never did. She then adds, asking the prince if it really has to be her by his side. Since the engagement was based on conditions, wouldn't it be better for him to find a young lady with better prospects than hers? The prince, now tired of Bione's nonsensical talk, replies that she must be misunderstanding things, since there is no one with better prospects than her. Bion asks if he's sure about that. She needs, one way or another, to stop this marriage from happening. Since she never cared what others thought of her and now no longer needs to please him, she doesn't have to hold back and can simply say what she thinks. And so, she continues, telling the prince that if he wants, she will gladly find the perfect lady for him. Still annoyed by the conversation, the prince says that even if someone better than Bion really existed, so what? They've already had their official engagement ceremony, and she is officially his fiancée. There's a much simpler solution. She just needs to love him. He steps closer, almost kissing her, but when she tries to stop him, he grabs her hand. Showing his darker side, he says that when prey runs, it's instinct for the hunter to chase. And not to brag, he's an excellent hunter, so she better not provoke him. He even finishes his sentence by calling her, my bye. On the way back home, Bion wonders if he had always been this insane, or if it's just in this life. But she knew he wouldn't have simply agreed to break the engagement. It was never going to be that easy. Especially since in this life, he still hadn't met the girl with blue hair, and he still needed what Bion had in connection to her family. Even so, his reaction was a little suspicious. He wasn't angry or irritated. He was just staring at her like a predator eyes its prey. And that irritated her because she was so shocked by his reaction that she couldn't do anything. But she should have just punched that annoying yet handsome face. Honestly, letting things happen as they were meant to this time wouldn't be so bad. Because after all, she wasn't going to suffer the way she had in the past. As soon as she finds her true love, she can simply step away and pursue her own life. To find someone she truly loves and live happily ever after. Even just finding companionship and living out her days until she's old would be good enough. But the way he treated her that she won't let go. How dare he call her prey? Does he think only hunters can hunt? She decides to make him regret it and show that even hunters can become the prey of their victims. As soon as she returned to the mansion, she asked the maid where Lant was. Apparently, he was at the training grounds and the maid asked if she should go call him. But Bion decided to go there herself, since she was concerned after hearing that he had brought a retired soldier to be his teacher. But as expected of someone who once ranked in the top 10 of the empire, he was an excellent instructor. She didn't understand much about fighting, but seeing Lant going toe-to-toe with someone like that for so long, his teacher must have had serious talent. After the training, they greeted each other, and Lant noticed that Bion was already back home. Happy to see her, he asked what she had gone there for, calling her sister. At that moment, Bion continued treating him like her little puppy, and told him not to call her that. Just because he was a little older didn't mean he could start ignoring her words, since her words were law. And the poor guy seemed completely smitten. Or maybe just pitiful. He noticed she wasn't acting like usual and asked if something had happened at the palace. She said yes, that she had been bitten by a mad dog who probably had rabies. Worried, Lant asked how there could be a dog in the palace and if she was hurt. Without saying anything, she simply hugged him. He got flustered, saying he had just trained and probably smelled like sweat, but she told him no, that she could only smell the scent of warm sunlight. Lant was the most comforting person Bion knew, and that's why she wanted things to stay just the way they were. But before she could even recharge her energy on her little puppy, a maid appeared saying she had terrible news. Her grandfather, Count Piso, was in very poor health. After the day they had last parted, she wasn't sure if it was just a coincidence, but it was the exact same day he had died in her past life. The day he came to visit her, 2 months later. He had moved to a mansion close to hers, and because of that, he often came to visit. It was as if he were trying to make up for lost time with her. But for some reason, his body remained very fragile, and so everyone around him had been preparing for the inevitable. And that day had likely come. When she arrived at the Count's mansion, she found Elle, the Count's daughter, Ariel, and now also her aunt. A bit confusing, right? Because of the ages and all, but that's how it was. Bion asked why she was there alone, that she shouldn't be wandering around. But Elle said she wanted to go into her father's room. Even though she knew Elle really wanted to see him, Bion was worried about letting her go in and witness something painful. From inside the room came someone she already recognized. Evan, the successor of Count Piso. The information about Evan Pinson had always been a mystery, even in her past life. No one knew his nationality, who his parents were. Nothing had ever been revealed. Because of that, the Pinson family had always been suspicious of him and had opposed him becoming the heir. Still, according to the Count's wishes, he inherited the title of Count of Pinson. And after that, the Pinson family became far wealthier, entering its golden age. They were merchants, and many noblewomen loved to show off the items they had bought from the Pinsons. It became a trend to display their purchases: dresses, jewelry, shoes, all sorts of luxurious goods. Because of the impression Bion had of him, and the Pinsons as sellers of women's goods, she didn't expect him to be the way he was. Tall, broad-shouldered, with sharp features. He looked more like a warrior than a merchant. Elle was happy to see him and quickly ran into his arms. Bion was surprised because Elle was usually shy around strangers. If she acted like that with him, they must be very close and see each other often. He told Elle that she couldn't see her father just yet, because although he missed her terribly, he was very sick, so she had to wait just a little longer. While he comforted Elle, he looked toward the door, indicating for Bione and her father to enter and speak with the Count. The Count looked very weak, but he was happy to see Bion. Even though she was used to saying goodbye to many people, even in other lives having done it countless times, she still felt a heavy weight in her chest seeing her grandfather like that. He thanked her for coming and said he wished for her to be happy. And so he spoke his final words before passing. The Countess broke down in despair because she knew he was gone and began to cry. Bion realized that since she had reincarnated as a child, her grandfather was the first person she had truly felt was family, just like she had in her past life. His love and kindness were enough to melt all the ice and walls she had built around her heart as Bione in this life. Even though she had known he didn't have much time left, he still lived for another 4 years, unlike in the past. And for that, she was deeply grateful to have had even that extra time with him. The Marquis noticed that Bion wasn't well, and when he turned her toward him, he realized just how much she was crying. In a moment of weakness, she simply hugged her father, and he told her she could cry as much as she needed, that he would stay like that until her tears dried. Because of how cold they usually were with one another, she wanted to stop crying and pull away from that hug as soon as possible, but her tears just wouldn't stop. At the Count's funeral, the Pinson family was already fighting frantically over Evan's succession. Bion was shocked. In her past life, she had only heard about this. But now, witnessing it in person, she couldn't believe these people hadn't even shown up for the funeral, yet had the nerve to come argue about the Count's successor. She finally decided to speak up, to try and calm them down. To summarize, there were 4 beneficiaries of the Count's inheritance. His wife and daughter would receive the entire county as well as the family's territory, along with a fortune in money and treasures that would allow them to live out the rest of their lives in luxury. Just like in her past life, Bione received a small plot of land, some jewels, and a bit of money. Now, the main inheritance, which had been expected to go to Ariel's future husband, was what caused the uproar. The guardianship of Elle and the control of the entire Pinson Merchant Company were given to Evan. What surprised Bione in this life was that, unlike before, this time he was listed as Evan Lee, and not Evan Lee Pinson. The other relatives continued to argue. How could someone without a drop of Pinson blood inherit the entire merchant company? It made no sense. And what did they mean he would have custody? How could he be given custody of Ariel? Shouldn't it be someone older from within the family? They demanded that the Countess say something. How could she allow a complete stranger to be given custody of Ariel? But when the Countess replied that she trusted him, things only got worse. How could she trust someone more than her own family? They even began attacking the Countess's background, saying maybe Ariel wasn't even really the Count's daughter. Seeing that things weren't going to improve, Bione decided to call attention by smashing a soup pot. How dare they say that Elle, her aunt, wasn't of Pinson blood? Insinuating that her grandmother, the Countess, had cheated? Were they really saying that in front of her and the Countess? Realizing they had crossed a line, they tried to apologize to Bione, but she said she wasn't the one they should be apologizing to. And they understood she wanted them to apologize to the Countess. Even though they were family now, they still didn't believe she was worthy of the title, especially because of her humble origins. She only became Countess by marrying the Count. But standing in front of them was Bione, daughter of the Marquess and a strong candidate to become the next Empress. So they couldn't simply ignore her demand. One of them tried to cover it up, saying it was just a mistake made by a young man, and everyone else tried to agree to ease the tension. But the situation was bound to remain tense, as one of the elders said that even if she was powerful, this wasn't a place for someone who hadn't even had her coming-of-age ceremony yet. She got irritated and asked for his name. He said he was Chrysoslath. And to close out their humiliation, she said she had never even heard that surname before. She thought that for someone arguing about succession, they'd at least be heirs to some noble house. But not even that was true. And she finished by saying that, young or not, unlike them, who didn't even have a middle name, she was truly a noble young lady. After all, not even he could pass down such a noble title to his son. They still try to argue, but she keeps belittling them for not being true nobles. She asks that, since people who aren't even real nobles are trying to take the Count's house and name for themselves, who should she hold responsible? Seeing that it was going nowhere and no longer wanting to hear insults, the man asks if she would be satisfied if they simply accepted Evan as the successor. But our protagonist doesn't seem willing to let it go, because she asks him who he thinks he is to accept or decide anything. When he calls her Miss again, she corrects him. Bione Losa Aliant. Losa isn't just a middle name, but the name of another family. Normally, noble women only receive the surname of their husband upon marriage, but there are a few exceptions. And that's when there is no other heir in the family or when the family decides to pass succession on to their daughters. And since, by imperial law, a woman cannot be the head of the family, that right of succession through the surname is transferred to her husband or to her children. Only a child cannot inherit 2 family names at once. That's why a child takes the surname of the father, and the inheritance of the mother's family is reflected in the middle name. So, going back to the past, what exactly does Losa mean to them? And then they remember Lossart. Lossart Riddle Peason, the name of the founder of House Pison. And since she inherited that name, she holds supreme power within the house. And right there, she decrees her will to banish them from the Pison family forever, bringing that argument, and the dangers it could pose to Ariel's future, to an end once and for all. After her grandfather's funeral, she returned to the palace a week later to meet with the crown prince. As she was being escorted by the butler through the palace, she noticed that this wasn't the path to the palace of Bezaid, the crown princess's palace where they always met. The butler explained that, according to His Majesty's orders, she was to be escorted to the palace of Bahoth. She even asked why. but the butler said he was just a servant, so he didn't know. He only followed orders. She felt a bit confused because the palace of Bahoth was the emperor's palace. When she arrived at the garden, she realized it wasn't just the crown prince there, but also his father, the emperor, who were both pleased to see her. She greeted them politely, but the emperor said there was no need for such formality, since they were much more than acquaintances now. Even the crown prince pretended to be closer, pulling out a chair for her and even calling her Bai as a nickname. And it seemed like he knew how to make Bione's heart skip a beat, because as soon as she sat down, he whispered near her ear. The emperor was delighted by the interaction between them, because it made it seem like they were much closer than before. Trying to avoid that, she continued responding to the emperor politely, which he didn't like much, since he wanted to be closer to Bione. But the crown prince said that was part of her charm, and his father would have to understand. He even started calling her Bai too, and asked when she was finally going to treat him comfortably, since soon they'd be just one family. Bione realized what was really happening. The crown prince had called her there because her 16th birthday was approaching, and with her coming-of-age celebration, marriage would most likely follow. The crown prince even made a point of saying that there were only 3 months left until Bione's birthday, so they had to start preparing everything as soon as possible. Will Bione follow the same path as in her past life and actually marry the crown prince? Or will she manage to find a way to sever her ties with him? Will he be different in this life and truly fall in love with her? Or will he change and despise her the moment the girl with blue hair appears again? That's it for today, folks. Hope you enjoyed it. Leave your thoughts in the comments. Don't forget to like the video and subscribe so you can keep watching the next chapters of this series. Kisses, and see you next time.